Unconventional Soldier, a military podcast brought to you by two British Army veterans in association with ISAR.com.
Welcome everyone, and thanks for downloading the first episode of 2022. Last year was a great one for the podcast, and we reached a milestone of 40,000 downloads in December, so we'd like to take the opportunity to thank you all for listening and supporting the series. This year we hope we'll continue to provide content that you'll find interesting, and we have the following episodes planned and are working on others. Firstly, we've got one on 148 battery. We've got one with John Tulloch, who is a New Zealand Army veteran who fought in Vietnam, and he's going to discuss the FOO role in Vietnam. We're also going to later on have another podcast on John's book about the British Army in Borneo in World War II. Next, we've got a podcast on Royal Navy clearance divers, one on private security companies, one on artificial intelligence and warfare, and an episode with Rob Long, who is a blind veteran he was injured in Afghanistan, lost his sight in Afghanistan, and he's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion. A really inspiring story with Rob there as well. So today then, carry on, and we're going to talk about SCOF in the Army, Scran if you're a Royal Marine, and obviously dining at the Ritz if you're in the RAF. So in this episode, we're going to cover nutrition, specifically developments in providing rations for soldiers in high-performance endurance events. So anyone who's been a soldier knows that when you're deployed in ops, your existence boils down to doing your job, eating and sleeping. But the ration pack itself is a relatively new invention, and for many armies through the ages, they had to live off the land, forage or steal in order to survive. However, the aim throughout the centuries has been to put the most calories in the bellies of soldiers quickly, efficiently, and for the least cost. If you ever had an army have a bag or dined at a Sodexo facility, you know that least cost one's the main driver. So our guest today is Ali Macdonald, co-founder and CEO of Resilient Nutrition, and Ali served in the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, the HAC, and the London Scottish. So Ali, our first guest in 2022. It's great to have you on the pod. And we normally start off with our guest backstory, so over to you.
Thanks, Cole. Thanks, Kev. Great to be on the pod. As I said before, it's a great show, some great guests. I feel very privileged to be here. So, yeah, a bit of background. I grew up in a military family. My father joined the Scots Guards, right flank as a piper. Pretty rapidly got bored of bullying stuff and decided he wanted to jump out of aeroplanes. And he ended up spending most of his career with Number 1 Guards Independent Parachute Company. My personal military career started off in the Air Training Corps. I like to think I'm tri-service. I've spent quite a bit of time in various different organisations. But the Air Training Corps didn't get me any flying experience, but it did teach me how to do rubbish drill. And it probably was my first experience of rations, which at the time were tinned cheese and bacon, aka cheese possessed. Yeah, and then when I finished school, I went off to university, studied at Newcastle, and I joined the Officer Training Corps with grand ambitions to go to Sandhurst. Yeah, I mainly did that because you got paid, which was great, but get paid to go out for weekends at Otterburn and come back to a bar that was 50p a pint. I pretty rapidly got through my NTQ examination, so I became a trained soldier. And by 1994, I went across to the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, 6 RRF, who were just down the road from us as a PO. The plan was to go to Sandhurst the following September. So I had a bit of time that I was trying to fill. I tried to go and get a job with the university. That failed. But I was doing some interviewing, and for civvy jobs, this opportunity came up as a consultant. So I hot-footed it down to London. I was looking at options. The obvious one was to join the Fusiliers detachment in the London Reg, or I had some ambition to look at 2-1 SAS. The reason for that was a lot of my dad's buddies had gone on to G Squadron, and so I'd grown up with a kind of surrounded by these sort of superheroes with great stories from Borneo and Aden, Oman. I had a pretty good pair of lungs and legs on me. And I thought, okay, might as well give it a pop. But then someone said to me, look, it's hard to get in. It's even harder to stay in. Why don't you have a look at the HAC? And actually, at the time, my understanding of the HAC was probably Second World War. Yeah, it was this unit of potential officers that they could send anywhere to do all sorts of stuff. But after I went to the briefing, I kind of got a better idea of what the unit was doing. It's only actually, interestingly, having listened to these pods, I've actually realised that what I was going through was actually still pretty new. And the regiment was evolving, which it's obviously continued to do over the years. So I ended up in recruit course. I think it's 42 or 49. I've got a photo somewhere, and went through recruits. That was a great experience. I mean, as we've heard on previous episodes, any reserve unit is going to be an interesting group of people. It tends to be quite a different population in terms of they're there voluntarily. They're there. They've got a job. They do outside of it, and we had the usual mix. We had guys working in the city. We had ex-regulars. We had reservists that were coming back for another pop. Recruits was great, and I won't go over the stuff that's been talked about in the past, but recruits was I was in an era when you did 6 months of recruits and then you did 6 months of PSC, which was great. The whole thing was just a great experience as a reservist.
What did your dad think he joined the HAC? Did you give him some stick, bearing in mind his background?
Yeah, he was just glad I wasn't joining the RAF. So
the RAF listeners, obviously, that's not me and Cole.
No, I got a little bit. No, Dad, to be fair, was he actually gave me that view that it's not about the unit, it's about the spirit and the camaraderie. And actually, when you're out there, cap badge doesn't really matter. It's kind of just get on with the job. But anyway, so I actually ended up in the nascent signal squadron. Kind of my work thing was data and technology. So actually anything that involved tech, I was quite interested in. I did my patrol medics, I did my patrol radio course. I never got deployed. I was a proper TA soldier. I think the only op I could ever claim to have been involved in was Princess Diana's funeral, which doesn't really count. So, but
hold on, Ali. You can't get away with that. What were you doing on Princess Di's funeral? Were you picking up litter, or were you doing something a bit more important?
We popped up some OPs to keep an eye on what people were doing. I think.
Okay.
The unit
you shot me down there, haven't you?
No. Well, as you know, the HAC can find a way to get involved in anything. If it's in London and it involves something big, there'll be someone from the HAC. So and eventually work took over. I transferred. I probably didn't mention my dad was a piper. I'm technically a piper, and I ended up across at the London Scottish with pipe band there. But also kind of being the token recce kind of guy, having spent most of my time in recce or that kind of surveillance-y, I-Starry type role. I did add some tactical value there. And I thought that was it. I did get to play the pipes to the Queen Mother with the band, which was good. Another little interesting one. And I thought that was it. That was mid-2020s. And then in 2018, I got a chance to go back and do Soldier A and B course. So I looked at going back at the very last knockings as a sort of 48-year-old, mainly because we were doing some work on human performance, and it fitted in quite well with the stuff that we were doing in my civilian job. And I just wanted to see what it was actually like. I'm kind of big on experience and building from real world experience. Sadly, I got booted out because I had a medical technicality, but I did spend some really good times back with the London Regiment with all of the new recruits. And I've got to say, I'm really impressed by the quality of recruits that are coming into the reserve forces now. What I came across was a bunch of mainly late teens, early 20s, some a little bit older, really enthusiastic. And you've talked on previous shows about reserve soldiers having another job. These guys were absolutely committed, and they were so. I think the biggest thing I noticed was curiosity. They were all committed and they were curious. They wanted to learn. They wanted to understand stuff. We had a bunch of female recruits going through their CMTs course, the Combat Medical Technicians course, and it was just great to see so many young people giving it a try, which was inspiring.
I think your days of we joined up in the 80s and it was do what you're told, shut up, don't ask questions. There's absolutely no way you can continue that line of soldiering these days because people are A, they're not scared of authority anymore, and B, generally speaking, they are better educated, I think, in a lot of circumstances.
Also, I think the reserve forces have changed massively. The reserve forces of today, compared to what they were like in the 70s and 80s, is unrecognisable. They are...
Yeah. Afghanistan as well was a turn of
Iraq, Afghanistan, and Bosnia, because they were deployed to Bosnia as well and other places. Total different organisation now to the old TA as it was.
Yeah. I mean, it's that operational turnover and actually getting experience.
And I think the mindset from the regulars as well, the PSIs that were coming in, they've changed their mindset as well, because, dare I say it, in the old days, some of the PSIs that would go to the TA or the permanent staff instructors from the regular army were not always going to be the best or the most motivated. Now they're going with tons of experience and they're trying to get that across, and it makes a big difference.
A lot of time, back in sort of the 90s and 80s, it was a guy in his last couple of years' service that wanted to go back to his hometown. And as you say, Kev, not necessarily the best guy to be putting there as an advert for the regular army.
And I suppose the converse of that was that, the whole stab mentality. You rocked up as a reservist or a TA soldier, and you had to prove yourself so much more. As soon as you had contact with a regular unit. And one thing I did like that happened a lot more, and it happened by the time I came back in 2018, was direct connections with regular units. So London Scottish was paired with the Scots Guards, who were just down the road in Knightsbridge. And so that kind of interconnection both at the soldier level, but also at the unit and training level had changed, which is great. Just actually having that. It didn't just happen on camp or on deployment. It actually happened, day to day.
No, it makes a big difference, I think. And it like I say, the mindset's changed massively. The reserve forces now are unrecognisable. They're a hell of a lot more professional. They get the same kit. They go through some of the same training. They go on the same operations. They hold their own now.
And sadly, they get to eat the same rations, which brings us nicely on to our main pod of the day. So that's you, Kev.
Yeah. I'm setting off mute. When we joined up in the 80s, the ration pack, as I remember it, were issued, came in various sizes. You had the individual, the 4-man, the 10-man, depending what type of vehicle you're on or what type of role you're in. It was primary tin food with lots of chocolates in tins. Everything was in tins. And then we started to move towards the ball in the bags. But my memories of, obviously, the tin stuff was great, because obviously when I went to the jungle, we all had tins, because we didn't have ball in the bags at the time. In the 80s, I was fortunate enough, I was attached to the Gurkhas, so I had Gurkha rations, which were more ball in the bag, but obviously designed for Gurkha soldiers. It took me a little bit of time to get used to a lot more rice and the way the meat was pulled together as well. When I went to the Arctic, obviously it's all dry rations, because obviously there's plenty of water, a load of boiling. I was talking to Colin about this. Obviously MREs were always something that you always got a hold of if you could, because you use them as your emergency rations, because you had the American cooker as well. I experienced quite a lot. And then the ball and the bags came in, which seemed like a real big luxury. But the one thing about all the rations are, they give you this big box and you're still only going to take one bag, one packet of biscuits. You're not going to take the whole thing. It's too big. So to get all those calories, you can't carry it.
And that's a good point, because you think about an Arctic ration pack. If you ate everything, gave you 6,000 calories roundabout. A normal ration pack's about 4,000 calories. But as you've just alluded to, you never took the whole lot. So you're probably maybe getting 2,500, 3,000 calories. So
you're probably looking at a 24-hour ration box size, and that'd be your rations for 7 days. Because you try and pack everything into that, because how much energy we're going to use to carry it? Where was you going to carry the fuel to cook it and keep it warm if you're allowed to cook? And all the rest of it. It was the great concepts, but for the dismounted soldier, they're an absolute nightmare.
I mean, and that's been probably the most consistent thing we've seen. Whenever you talk to anyone that's had rations, is box gets opened. There's, I think, 42, 43 items in a typical ration pack. 20, 30 of them get ditched. The other lot get traded and bartered for other rations. And then then it gets stuffed into any pouch or pocket or flap that it can be. That's been it for years.
Yeah.
And I think, and I mentioned it a little bit as well, was I think what was even slower in the development side was, especially for the dismounted soldier, was how to cook this stuff. Because cookers, it was hexi blocks and that was it. And nothing else was brought in quickly, apart from in the Arctic, you got a peak stove. But all this stuff was it was slow. And that's why, I mean, when we got MREs and when I was in Northern Ireland, the RUC hot cans, which I thought were brilliant, they self-cooked and all the rest of it. But yeah, my memories of the rations are everything was heavy and it never gave enough energy.
Looking, Ali, then about the history of rations from your perspective then, what can you tell us?
Okay, a little potted history of rations. So the notion of a ration's been around since the Romans. The Navy is probably the one we associate a lot with, as well as the Army. So the Pusser's ration, the rum ration. People always remember the rum ration. But
which didn't go out to the 1970s, didn't it? It was still, I think, early 1970s, isn't it?
Yeah.
Later than that, we still had it in the jungle.
Yeah, that's right.
Because arduous training, arduous conditions, doctor could still sign off. So in the jungle, we still got, because we had to have fresh days as well as, if you're in the jungle for so long, you have to have what's called fresh days. So they have to have so much fresh food every, I think it was 7 or 10 days.
They're still issuing it for the Arctic warfare training as well.
So, but in the old days, back in the day, the ration wasn't a box of food. It was essentially a statement of what the quartermaster was expected to give the troops or the sailors. So essentially, it was a notional set of weights and measures of a set of products that would deliver based on the best knowledge of the time, the nutrition required for the environment. So if we go back to 1805, this is before the arrival of the tin can. The average soldier's daily ration consisted of 1.5 pounds of bread or flour, or 1 pound of ship's biscuits, 1 pound of beef or half fat of pork, a quarter pint of dried peas, sounds good, 1 ounce of cheese or butter, 1 ounce of rice, and 5 pints of beer, or 1 pint of wine, or half a pint of spirits. That's half a pint of whiskey. So it was nutritionally interesting, and it really, that hadn't changed for 200 years, and essentially it was pretty similar to what the Romans were eating. The critical thing that changed was around 1812. Two guys called Donkin and Hall set up basically they bought the patent for the preservation of food using a tinned iron canister. So it was the arrival of the tin can. And not only did that change the future of rations, but it also had, obviously, as we all know, a profound effect on history. So if food could be preserved for longer, it effectively meant the soldier or the explorer could go for longer and further without support. Prior to canning, explorers had ventured into the unknown for hundreds of years, loaded with barrels of salt beef, pork and fish. And the obvious side effect, it was great at killing off the microbes and bacteria, but it meant that most of your food was salty. And so basically left you with some pretty unappealing food that was essentially, it got you through, but it certainly wasn't enjoyable.
And that was one of the reasons that soldiers and sailors got scurvy, wasn't it? The poor nutritional value in the food.
That's right, and it's still and why citrus fruit became a thing, a requirement. You talked about it, Kev. Was just it's still a thing. The goal from a nutrition perspective, we spent some time in the kitchens with the guys up at Bryce Norton who look after essentially all the rations that get shipped out to anywhere that we're on operations. And the goal is within 7 days to get guys onto local rations. And the reality is, and I'm sure both of you will know this, is you end up with hybrid situations. When you've got to a critical mass in a fob or somewhere where you can get stuff locally. And some great stories from deployments about getting a goat. And I think there was a number for the cost of a goat in Afghanistan. The cost of buying it was $50. The cost to the MOD was $1,500. There was some because of all the bits and pieces that had to happen. But I think the reality has always been a combination of what you're given from the quartermaster and what you can get from your surrounding environment. But so back to Bermondsey, 1813, Donkin and Hall, they set up a canning factory in Bermondsey, and they started producing canned food for the British Army. And that really was where the ration pack started. Because tin cans were the core of the ration pack for probably from then through till post-Second World War. They were always there. In fact, probably 70s, and they're still in the 10-man ration pack with a fewer adjustments. Going to the Boer War, First World War, we started to see tins and packets appearing in soldiers' rations. with the addition of the all-important tea, and from a performance perspective, this comes back in history, it's caffeine. And that notion of familiarity is something we've seen all the way through rations. And it's something that we see now is you've got to produce products that the average soldier is familiar with, which is why things like corned beef has survived through being in tins and in boil in the bag. Yeah, it's a familiar. Yeah, it's why curry comes back. So there's definitely a thing about familiarity.
I also think, Ali, when you start eating another nation's rations, initially the concept's quite good because it's a little bit different. But I've always found that I always gravitated back to our ration packs. Using MREs as an example, to me they were just like kiddie food snacks.
Novelty.
They were a novelty, and it wore off quite quickly, to be honest.
Yeah. Vacuum packed pizza only goes for so long. Yes. So then we started to get into. There was a company called McConaughey of Aberdeen who came up with the M&V ration, even though a lot of the product wasn't actually made by them. And the idea of that was that the contents could be eaten hot or cold. So that started to get us towards this idea of a meal in a tin or a meal in a bag. So what else? What else started to come in? Second World War, we started to see things like biscuits, chocolate, what are sometimes called the ancillaries or the sundries. So matches, loo paper. Started to get things like boiled sweets in addition to tea. So actually, what's interesting about that is we're starting to get a little bit of diversity in terms of nutrition. So a boiled sweet is pretty much straight carbohydrate, which is actually quite useful when you're having to hoof it. Higher levels of intensity tend to require carbohydrates. So I wouldn't say we were getting very scientific about it, but we were certainly getting more diversity.
I think as well in the Second World War, didn't they issue cigarettes in ration packs as well?
Yeah. Very healthy. So post-war. So I think as this podcast has heard quite a few times, we were very familiar with West Germany and the German cuisine. That was also the same time, so the 80s, when we started to get the menu system. We all talk about menu A through G. Any comments on favourite menu?
God, I can't remember. I think menu A rings a bell to me for some reason.
Worried chicken was always a favourite, but chicken in brown sauce was horrible.
Oh, mate.
Yeah.
Which was bacon grill.
Bacon grill.
And you can still get bacon grill in Sainsbury's, and I love it.
I know, but it was I don't know what it was. Eating that cold was horrible because there was lumps of fat all over it. Because when you open the tin up, the fat hasn't been cooked, and you were just slicing it and thinking, this is not going to taste nice.
But if you could lay your hands on a nice bit of thick sliced white bread and just jam some sort of
cheese possessed in strawberry jam, maybe. I used to like that.
Yeah,
I think the test of any menu was, could you eat it cold?
True,
because that was the tester. If you couldn't eat it cold, it was horrible, and that I think dictated to what menus you preferred, not the menus you got, because the quartermaster would just give you whatever he had in the store.
That's it. Okay, so we're moving on. Mid-90s, boil in the bag arrived, and that was enabled by a thing called the retort pouch. So essentially what we were able to do is laminate an aluminium foil with 3 different kinds of plastic in a malleable pack, which meant that you could, and the beauty of the retort pouch, which still survives now, is that you could heat it up. It could withstand heat. So you could stick it in your metal mug, stick it on top of the Hexi cooker, boil it up, warm up the contents. That was transformation. And Kev, to your point, you could eat them hot or cold, and actually they didn't taste too bad. That was a big step forward. Everything's evolved over time around the best thinking. We start to get on to, by the 80s, we were starting to see things like energy bars. And I think I'll talk about this a bit later on, that there's always been a relationship between kind of the commercial world and the military. And the military always think, what can we learn from business? And business always think, what can we learn from the military? And it's actually things like dextrose tablets. Remember the dextrose tablets that cropped up for a wee while? They were designed because someone recognised that we needed more glucose in that mix, and actually those kind of tablets could be absorbed better. They were probably better than a boiled sweet. Same goes for energy bars in general.
But going back to what you're saying there, Ali, about soldiers, I didn't know MD ate those dextrose tablets. They were binned every time. 9 times out of 10.
You'd never carry them. My brother was a diabetic, and dextro tablets, all diabetics carried them.
Well, they did, didn't they? They fell apart. They just, as soon as they got wet, that was the issue with them. You put them in your pocket, and by the time you got 2 days into an exercise, they were mush.
You had to choose carefully what you were willing to take, and you were trying to find something that was going to be tasty towards the end, hot or cold, was going to survive sitting in your pack and getting bashed around, survive a river crossing, survive the rain and everything else.
Yeah, and dextrose tablets weren't doing it.
No, no, can't swim.
But do you know what? I think probably the biggest thing is everyone had their system. And I think that is still true. Everyone would have a unique kind of set of things they'd rip out, things where they'd put them.
Yeah.
And that was part of the art of feeding in the field. It still is. It's kind of like you've got the stuff you like, what you do with it, when you use it. What gives you the morale boost over the guy next to you.
Yeah, but I think what was also important though is we used to supplement rations. When I was in the jungle, we had multivit tablets. We took in tins of fish and tuna just to break up the rations, but also to get some more goodness in that we weren't getting from the ration packs. And we did it on every exercise, and on operations, you do exactly the same. You try and supplement it with what you think you might need.
That's it, and it's interesting. Tin fish is great. We've done so many plans for guys, rowing the Atlantic or going on expeditions. Tin fish is a great get out of jail. Fresh food for the first 10 days. And soldier supplement, we see a lot of guys ordering in stuff to just get enough calories. And jungle's a really good one because the tradition in the jungle is you come out probably 6 kilos lighter than you went in.
Hip and thigh diet, as it's called.
So, it comes to the modern day, whilst most of the military are spending money on AI, tech, hardware, we like to protect that final bastion of the meat in the middle. So our job really is to try and make sure that we keep that guy on the ground, a guy or girl on the ground, in the air, on the water, as well fed and in the game as possible.
It's even more complicated these days because back in our day it was take it or leave it, but nowadays you've got to cater for soldiers' tastes, and they might be vegetarian, they might need halal. There's whole different menu sets there as well, and the Army's actually getting quite good at taking into individual religious and other dietary needs too.
It is, but that causes a logistical issue as well, especially when you're moving food from the UK onto operations, especially austere operations, where you've only got limited space on an aircraft or whatever. Instead of the old days where you just threw menu G and loads of it and everyone would just eat the same stuff, adding those other commutations can add a complication for them as well.
You made a great grumpy quartermaster, wouldn't you, Kev?
Right? All I remember was when I used to go down to the quartermaster store and ask him for rations, he would look at what he's got available, and no matter what I asked him for, that's what I was going to get. And I'd be like going, but I need something to break it up, 7 days on the same menu is miserable. And he'd just smile and start to still get the same stuff.
So, Ali, having been in the forces and having that experience there, what inspired you to set up Resilient Nutrition?
A lot of people ask me that, and I've had a bit of a hybrid career. If you asked me 15 years ago, I didn't know the difference between a carbohydrate and a protein, barely. I got more interested in it over time because I'd always been an endurance guy. Cross country running at school, and I'd done the HAC course with a lot of running around with weight on your back. I was always doing long distance stuff. Always fascinated by this notion of physical and mental resilience. What was it that kept people in the game? And I remember being inspired by that James Elroy Flecker poem about the pilgrims, and just this curiosity about that place in the distance that you could travel to through adversity. And
it's always associated with 22 SAS as well, isn't it? That we are the Pilgrim's Master.
Yeah, and it's written on. Is it not written on the clock, on the base of the clock at Hereford? It's definitely associated with the regiment. And I suppose home for me. Yeah, I know you can't tell it from the accent, but family home is up on the west coast of Scotland. So, Dad grew up in a place called Roybridge, which is just down the road from Achnacarry. Achnacarry is the home, the spiritual home of the commandos. And there's still you'll still see it. Lots of people go up there and do the 10-miler up in Lochaber. And he used to tell me stories about as a kid how he would trade eggs and milk and and stuff from the farm with the commandos in return for a cabbie on their kit and a few shots on the Bren gun. And so, having spent a lot of time up there, I just had this passion for being out in the hills and seeing how far you could go. And so, as a result of that, I kind of started to think more and more about how do you feed yourself in the field, and not in the field, but on those kind of high, those endurance events. I was always comfortable surviving, in nature, but at the same time, I knew that what if we could get this kind of hybrid? How could we get the best out of nature and the stuff that was available to us? What were those minimum injects that would really change the game? And then mid 2013, by then I'd set up a company called Optimal Human Performance. So we'd started to look at, we weren't looking at nutrition specifically, we were looking more at kind of what are the kind of pillars of resilience. And everything from kind of having a solid purpose and mission and to mindset, but also things like nutrition, exercise, sleep, and environment. And out of that, we started to do some more scientific research on how could you measure resilience and how could you measure what does the body tell us about how fast someone is pushing themselves and how far could we potentially take them. So we looked at things like HRV, heart rate variability, and essentially that's the variability in the peaks and troughs of your heart rate. And so a high heart rate variability means that your heart is responding very fluidly to the pressure that you're under. And it's a really good indicator of stress. It's not a very good indicator of acute stress. It's a very good indicator of kind of longer cycle stress. We also started looking at things like NASA developed a thing called the Task Load Index, which enables you to measure psychological stress. And we did more and more research into really the things that you could measure. And we started getting into looking at things like ambient measurement. So what are the devices? So wearables were kind of getting quite popular. We started to look at what wearables you could use. So people have talked about, have you seen the Aura rings, people wearing rings that measure heart rate, look at sleep quality?
It's interesting. Sorry, I could just jump in. It's interesting you should bring all this up because I did 22 in the army, and when I left, I joined a civvy gym because in the army, you're very fortunate, you got a gym in your back door. But also, I was sort of conditioned to train in a certain way. And then I went to the civvy gym one day, and I was thrashing myself in the gym. Bear in mind, I'm in my early 40s at this point, and one of the instructors came up to me and said, "Can I ask you what you're doing? I've seen you come in here a few times. What are you trying to achieve?" And I'm like that going, "Well, I just want to thrash myself." And he goes, "But what are you trying to do?" And he actually, for the first time in my life, set me up with a proper training program, how to use a heart rate monitor, how to train intelligently. And the gains I made in my fitness over a couple of months on this training program, which I poo-pooed at first, it was huge.
Yeah, exactly. And it takes someone to tell you. Yeah, otherwise you believe what you've been taught. Yeah, and it's spot on. Funnily enough, we've done quite a bit of work on that whole notion of when I went back to the Londons, the work we were doing on the civvy side was around designing a training program for recruits. And when you look at it, it's about education. The big lever is how do we change perception at the soldier level about what nutrition actually is and what training you need to do to achieve the goal. And if you look at some of the leading edge programs now, they're all about adapting nutrition, sleep, exercise for the training goal in mind. So, if you're training for, a hot, arduous deployment, then, you're going to be better at it. And that's going to be a different training protocol and nutrition protocol than, if you're going to train for door kicking, where, you're going to need much more strength. And
that ties into that the civvy PTI's question to me, what was I training for?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I told him I wanted, I laid out a set of conditions and he just adapted me a training program to that. So that fits entirely with what you're saying there.
Yeah, spot on. Yeah, so, by, when was it? Probably by 2017, 2018, we developed looking at different interventions, both physical and nutritional interventions. Yeah, ultimately what we were trying to develop was this thing called ILAW, Intelligent Load Optimization and Recovery Engine, which was really where all of my experience kind of came together. A techie who had an interest in data with a bit of a military leaning and an interest in physical, cognitive, performance type training. And what ILAW did was essentially enabled us to, we built a proof of concept that enabled us to measure the load that an individual was experiencing, both physical and cognitive load, and start to predict what the failure point would be. And what we learned from that was that actually everyone is unique, and you end up having to have a model for everyone. What it boiled down to was, the more data we could collect on each individual on training, the more we could dial in all of these protocols. So getting much more towards this notion of personalized training, personalized nutrition. That led us to do some work that looked at specifically nutrition. So essentially we had two paths, and we started specifically to look at, the brief was to look at nutritional interventions that would help sustain performance in the face of sleep loss and fatigue. And I very luckily got to work with my co-founder at Resilient Nutrition, a guy called Dr. Greg Potter, whose PhD was in a thing called chrononutrition, which essentially is the relationship between time and what you eat. We'd got to work together on a few things before that. Greg had previously done some work with the US Marine Corps, specifically on sleep and recovery. And I'll say to anyone, if you're doing an endurance event, sleep is probably the biggest factor. Sleep and hydration. Put bluntly, you've got even a skinny person's got enough fat on them to get round most courses at a moderate tempo. The stuff that makes a difference is sleep and hydration.
Sorry, I'll just jump in. What's the sort of the longest distance where without nutrition your body will just collapse? It depends on the individual.
I've seen people go out to 2-3 days, without and still being able to sustain performance if you have hydration. It's almost like hydration first. If you can then keep, Kev, you mentioned this, multivits, vitamin and mineral supplementation will keep you in the game. Then you start, what happens to your body is without eating anything, depends if you've trained for this, within 24 to 48 hours, you start to generate a thing called ketones. And the body can use ketones as a fuel source. And so interesting, a lot of guys doing training for endurance events, so a lot of guys going on selection now, will periodize their training to create this adaptation to better use ketones as fuel.
And you can smell that on people, can't you?
Yes. Sort of funny breath, kind of sweating out ketones. But and that actually is probably one of the things that's really interesting about the human body. We're Stone Age bodies in a space age world, and our bodies. If you look at how each of us perform and our bodies work, not a huge amount of it is down to what we've done in our lifetime. Most of the way that your body responds to food and nutrition is determined by thousands of years of genetics. The next thing that influences is probably the last 2 generations. So what your parents ate, that has an effect. And then it's only a small percentage is affected by what you eat in your lifetime. So, people do get allergies sometimes. People do sometimes have, start to get responses to certain things. You've all got friends in their 40s and 50s who've started to not respond well to wheat or alcohol, but the bulk of how your body actually fuels itself is, thousands of years of, history. So, we then get into the crazy world of drugs. Unsurprisingly, the guys that first looked at, you can argue the Greeks were the first people to look at how we might use drugs or supplements to improve performance. And there's a really good book called Stealing Fire that talks about some of the early hallucinogens that were used by the Greeks and the Romans to fuel warriors into battle. But the one that really cracks it is the Nazis. And the Second World War really was when we started to see wide scale use of drugs and chemicals to improve performance. And the big one in there was amphetamines, crystal meth that the Nazis used exceptionally well in their initial traverse across Europe in 1940.
So Bomber Command used amphetamines as well, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but both sides used it. Yeah. We always think it was just the other side, but we were pretty good at using those kinds of things. And they're still used. They have been used, up until things like the Gulf War. Yeah, and you can argue that they're still in use. So if I look at kind of modern day times, the kinds of things that people have been, modafinil is talked about. Modafinil's a prescription drug that was developed for narcolepsy. So I don't know if you know what narcolepsy is, but narcolepsy is the condition that people will spontaneously fall asleep. Modafinil was developed for that. And together with caffeine, it's probably the most prevalent kind of drug or supplement that's used to offset, sleep and fatigue. So, that brings us up to now. So we did a bunch of work looking at how to optimize nutrition using all levers. And then in 2019, we got to work with two guys, Max and Dave. Rather fortuitously, I met Max at an event. He said, "I'm rowing the Atlantic and we want to break the record. Can you help?" So we essentially put all of this knowledge and experience together and designed a system for them. And having initially thought they'd take 50 days, they ended up taking 37 days, 35 days, 34, 7 hours, 54 minutes. Anyway, they knocked 15 days off the record, or what they thought they were going to take. And that was really where Resilient started. We went from being kind of quite scientific, researchy kind of consultants to actually making real product. And that's really been where we've focused since then, is looking at typically quite extreme events and looking at how do we keep those guys in the game as long as possible and as effective as possible.
And did you cater the nutrition system you provided for those two guys that rowed the North Atlantic? Did you provide it bespoke for them based on investigations into their body types that you referenced earlier?
Yeah, and that tends to be the protocol. So anyone, you'll always want to get as much information about the individual as possible. Baselining their profile, understanding age, height, weight are all big factors. Gender's a factor. Allergies, preferences, they're all kind of like fundamental things. Then once you've got an idea of the profile, you can go as far as to doing things like blood panel tests to understand things like iron deficiency. Interesting, is a really big issue amongst endurance athletes. So blood panel data is really quite useful. And then once you've got that, you can then go, right, what's the challenge in hand? What are we looking at? And often, we've been working with teams that we've got one team that we're working with that aren't doing their event until next year, and we've been speaking to them for 2 years. And they're constantly dialing in their system, working down at the individual level what works best for them. So that personalization makes a difference. But it's the old Brailsford thing. Only some people can go to that 1% or that 0.1%. There's a lot of big levers you can pull, even basic levers.
So we talked about the advancements to date. How do you see the future then for military rations?
So I think I've touched on a little bit of this already. I think one of the biggest ones is going to be around personalization. And the battle is going to be between the quartermaster and the human performance guys. We've seen a massive growth in human performance leads. 2 or 3 years ago, that was a tier 1 SF type capability where human performance that was looking beyond standard training became a thing. That's now come down to tier 2. It's starting to find its way into kind of regular units. And I think all of that is very much centered on personalization, understanding the individual, understanding their profile, prescribing protocols that work for them. And the protocols are almost inevitably going to be physical training protocols, nutrition protocols, sleep and recovery protocols. And Colin, to your point, it's based on this notion of mesocycles. 4 to 6 week cycles where people are going through iterations of a system that are either preparing them for training or deployment or helping them recover from something.
You mentioned wearables earlier on, Ali, and what you're talking about there. Do you see the day when a soldier will have a wearable, how his performance will be monitored at the unit level? And if he's running low on iron, for example, or he's got a vitamin deficiency, that will be picked up with that wearable. And do you see it going down as far as that, or do you think that's just still in the realms of science fiction?
It's already in trials.
Right.
We're already doing it. I got to credit where it's due. The advancements in the use of technology and joining the dots on data are already there. So we know that things like the Aura Ring has been used down at Army Training Regiment, looking at kind of recruit sleep quality. It's already happening, and like a lot of innovations, they almost appear without you noticing. It doesn't appear with a fanfare. It just starts to permeate.
I mean, they were looking at, obviously, on the medical side, or on the with the future soldier, they were looking at, equipping the soldier with a whole range of systems so he could be monitored, including the heat index as well for him as well, because of body armor.
Yeah,
because that has a detrimental effect. The challenge is going to be in enduring operations in harsh environments where it's difficult to get all the elements out to the frontline troops. Is how you may be able to identify the deficiencies, but you may just have to live with that as you do now, because you just can't personalize everything and get every single thing out to them.
Yeah, and that's always going to be the case. When you get to, once you start taking away once you add more and more constraints, you just have to accept more and more run of the mill stuff. You get to that point. So, but things like personalization, particularly for things like environment and climate. So we're already doing things around specific vitamin, mineral supplement packs for altitude. Yeah, how the body behaves at altitude. So altitude, we tend to burn more carbohydrate. We tend to need more iron because the body's working harder to store oxygen and transfer oxygen around the body. You get performance advantages with things like nitrates. Nitrates do a thing called vasodilation. So they you'll notice it when your veins go a little bit, you see them more visible on your skin. That's vasodilation. That enables you to deliver more oxygen to the muscles and to cells. So there's things you can do with quite small products.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we can leverage. And just give you an example, we worked with a guy called Chris Gaskin who did the Wainwrights. Wainwright's peaks, I think it was 214 peaks, and he did it unsupported. So he took everything with him, and he did that on about 450, 500 grams of food a day. One part of that was vitamins and minerals. The other part was some nut butter. One was a dehydrated meal, and the last bit was a protein cookie. Yeah, but he grizzed it.
So outside that personalisation, in what other areas do you see changing then, Ali?
So I talked about environment, adapting for environment. I think the big one, particularly in the MOD at the moment, is sustainability. With all these things, you've got to look at them in slightly tangentially. Yeah, you kind of need to have your lateral thinking hat on, because it's not sustainability in a rations MOD supply chain environment. It is not about putting stuff in the recycling bin. Yeah, you start to get into things like refillables. You definitely get into, and one thing that we've focused on is energy required to move stuff around. If you make product lighter, you can either get more bullets on the helicopter, or you can get more bullets on the guy, and you don't have as many Hercules flying out from Bryce to get the stuff there. So weight and energy is really important from a sustainability perspective. Big focus on reducing the weight of these things. So to give you a sense, current ration pack weighs about 1.9 kilos. Yeah, as I say, we've designed and worked on systems that combine what's in here with some other lighter, smarter stuff, and you can get down to 800, 850 grams. Yeah,
a huge saving in weight then.
Yeah, you've ripped a kilo out of it. And I know we talked about a lot of guys ditching stuff from the packs.
Yeah,
but even then, you're still taking 500-600 grams out a day, and you're delivering something that's more nutritionally valid to the job in hand. The other one I'd say that is going to be a challenge, but is important, is education. That's been a big focus. I've got an example here. One of the things that we've been working on is how do you better educate the soldier on what to use when. If you talk to a sports nutritionist or a PTI now, they would talk about fueling for the work in hand. Rather than saying you need to get 6,000 calories on board, it's actually what tempo am I working at the moment? And so how do we educate a soldier that, okay, if I think I'm going to be breathing out my rear end for an hour running up a hill, I'm probably better off with a couple of gels or a carbohydrate drink than I am stuffing a Mars bar down, because I'm actually going to get I need more carbohydrate, and B, I need to get it on quickly, and fluids are the quickest way to do that. So it's educating people on what to eat when for the effect they want. And one of the big ones in there is night ops. The military runs on caffeine, but the education around when to use caffeine and how to use other things to stay awake and alert is pretty poor. So I think
there's always a payback, isn't there? When you use caffeine, there's always a come down. So is that what you're talking about there? Is getting that cycle of caffeine use correct? So that
caffeine's brilliant, but being a bit smarter about when to use it is the key. So if you know you're going to be up all night on a night on a night exercise or use caffeine at night. But remember, you might struggle to sleep when you get back to base. And there are other ways that you can look at to just improve your sharpness at night. So I think, education and how do you get that across? And there's two sides to that. There's educating the soldier. There's also educating the system. Not surprisingly, when you talk to a quartermaster or anyone involved in actually delivering this stuff, there's a lot of resistance because on the face of it, you're making it more complicated. Personalizing rations sounds complicated. You're having individual packs. Imagine menu A through G, but then with adaptations for Arctic, for jungle, you start to get to quite a few different combinations. The good news is that actually technology is there to help us there. So it's very easy for a soldier to put their personal profile into an app. It's very easy for an automated system to spit out what's required for that guy for 10 days in this environment. That's the other bit is technology. I think is going to find its way into how we deliver rations in the field.
We talked about hydration earlier. Obviously, the old rations, you have so much of a tin or a ball in the bag, and then you need so much water to help break that down to keep the system working. What's the impact on water? Do we need more water, or is it just the same?
Yeah, so you look at something like this. This is the standard sort of stuff you get. You get dehydrated meals are a big advantage because of weight. They do require water. They aren't half bad if you put cold water in. They're obviously a lot better if you put hot water in. The direction of travel is H2O first. I mean, I think technically somewhere in some standing orders, you're not supposed to put electrolytes or kind of effervescent tablets into water bladders. I know a lot of people do that. Directionally, we're looking at a secure, just straight H2O water supply is the first thing. We're looking at then improving heating mechanisms. So probably the biggest innovation there has been things like Dragon Fuel, which is now standard issue.
Is that little gel thing, is it, Ali?
Yeah, that's right. What's good about it is non-poisonous, very easy to light with a flint, and it doesn't need much to light it. When it burns, the whole thing shrivels down to virtually nothing, and it also biodegrades. It's also got really good thermic properties. So for not a very big block, you can heat up quite a significant amount of water. So clearly, if you're on hard routine, you're not going to be cooking anything. Use a naked flame. That seems to be the direction of travel.
And it doesn't have that Hexy stinker, take it, or leave the mess on your mug or your mess tins that Hexy used to leave.
No, it doesn't. It's a nice clean burn. It's based on ethanol, so that's a nice clean burn. Yeah, and the other one is just energy density. I think there's a lot more thought going into what goes into the items in a ration pack. So you want it to be, each evolution is going to move things forward, and you want the format to be familiar. What we're playing with now is how can we get more of the right kinds of calories, better match of protein, carbohydrate, and fat to the job in hand in a familiar format. It's how do we make bars better? In the latest iteration of the rations, we've got nut butters. They're going into the rations, and there's the leading edge, and there's what actually gets into procurement systems. Those are some of the key things happening.
I'm getting the impression from what you're saying here that you do have buy-in. The army is buying into this, and is this off the concept stage? Is it starting to feed into the field army?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. And as usual, starting with the kind of tier one guys, they're really kind of pushing the envelope in terms of, right, here's a situation that I need to solve for. What can you do? I've got to say, one of the big areas, Future Commando Force are really pushing the envelope. and what they're doing, ahead of the game. So hats off to the Royal Marines for what they're doing in terms of testing and learning.
Before we get on to that, Ali, I just want to ask you a quick question. And when talking to you before, you mentioned that the likes of Hereford has a human performance wing.
Yeah.
Can you just explain to me what they're looking into?
There's probably two dimensions to this. As you probably know, a couple of guys, several people died on selection a few years ago. And that really put kind of a warning sign in the system. Why was that possible? I think that the net result of that was a bigger focus on the human being in the middle and understanding, what is it that caused that. There's a big inquiry, but I think it also triggered a thought that actually, what could we be doing better about fueling these individuals? Because it was pretty obvious that there was a mindset thing that would get people through courses and stay in units like that. But actually, what could we be doing that could help them perform at their best? And I think also there was a recognition that, if you look at some of those courses now, it's no longer just grizzing it out. If you look at someone going off and doing the hills, they've actually built recovery time into it. And and the old and bold will go, well, it's not the same. It's not as hard as it used to be. But actually, I think it's just a recognition that you've got to give people the right environment to perform at their best. Nutrition, adaptive physical training, sleep and recovery is on the agenda now. And I think what you're finding is the kind of coaches that maybe work with professional sports teams are now doing that kind of work with the military. And the guys in the US are ahead of us as usual on that. So
you train athletes instead of, as it was in the old days, just train loads of soldiers.
That's it.
It's more scientific. It's more thought through. Instead of the old days, which was put your shorts on, off for a run, and off we go at the pace of the bloke in charge.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, and I think hopefully people will have seen this. The level and quality of training across the military and in the army, you just see it. That there's a recognition that.
But there's also a pragmatism there, Ali, in that you have a limited pool of people coming forward these days. So you can't afford it's not like the 1980s where I joined up and there's 3 million unemployed. There's a limited pool of people coming forward. So you've got to look after them in some respects as well, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. And with numbers dwindling, what is it that adds value? And actually a lot of these young recruits that are coming in, physical capability is important to them. They care about. They don't just care about how they look, but they also actually care about performing well. Yeah, and this is in run of the mill units. So you're starting to see much more focus. Focus on technology, focus on kind of science, and we see that coming in from across the military.
That's good. Can you just cover a little bit more on Future Commando Force, Alex? That's quite interesting what you said about that.
Yeah, so when we were working on ILAW, we were kind of explaining kind of some of this thinking, some of the stuff we talked about. We then got hooked up with Future Commando Force. And for those that aren't aware, essentially this is really an experimental force that the Marines built around one of the commando units and really was about testing new technology, new capability. What was good about it was it looked at both the technology, so lots of work on drones and autonomous, and they got issued with all the latest Cry kit, and they got the C8 weapon system. They got a bunch of stuff to try, and one of those things was looking at nutrition. So we spent probably a big chunk of the last couple of years working with them, looking at different adaptations to the existing nutrition system, but also things, not just the nutritional part, but also the usability and the functional part. An interesting element to that is the notion of how do you make it easy for a guy in the field to know what to take? So building on that thing we just talked about, this notion of a traffic light type system. What can I take now? What can I take when I in the firefight, or when I've got a moment? What do I take when I've got a bit longer? And then what do I take when I'm back at base where I've got some time to brew up? So big focus on that. Weight is a really big factor in there. So looking at how do we lean out the packaging. There's a bit of a crossover there because obviously sustainability is a big factor. Sustainable packaging in austere environments is still pretty much impossible. There isn't a compostable food packaging product that will survive a week on Otterburn. Some other things that come out of that, nootropics. So if you don't know, nootropic is something that helps with cognitive performance. And again, building on some of that research we did around fatigue and sleep loss, we've done some work on a product that's specifically designed to help with things like memory, mental processing speed, verbal fluency in the face of sleep loss and fatigue. What that work has given us is an opportunity to just almost go, what's the art of the possible? And the thing I'd probably highlight is the fact that is proper, it's almost proper agile, iterative thinking. Yeah, very fast to, could we try this? Let's make a prototype. Let's use it, test it, and then see what comes out of it. And if it works, let's evolve it more. If it doesn't work, drop it. And that's really good representation of, I think, the way that the military is increasingly working is, it's about speed.
Which is unusual for the army, because normally they take a lot of time, and especially in development and trials, don't they? They're notoriously slow.
Oh, yeah, and cost billions.
What sort of things that you're looking at then, environments, and what's in the sort of the packs? What are you developing along that lines?
So you won't be surprised, the main meal isn't really changing, but probably a bigger focus on dehydrated. Freeze-dried is probably the most effective way of keeping the nutrients in food products. As I say, format. So think meal replacement shakes. The US have been doing this for some time. There's a company called Ample Meals have made a meal replacement shake for some time. To say more componentized bars and kind of like snack type products. So rather than getting a Yorkie bar that tastes like a candle, you're starting to actually get stuff that tastes good, but also has some functional benefits. And then there's some novel stuff coming through. I mentioned nitrates and some of the benefits of nitrates. Sleep aids, specifically looking at how can we help people accelerate the onset of sleep. Personalized supplementation, nootropics we've mentioned. Another interesting one is around adaptogens. As we all know, the battlefield is a very stressful place. And so there's been an increased focus on how do we reduce the impact of that stress. So those are, but fundamentally we'll still see meals, we'll still see bars of chocolate. They just be slightly smarter.
It's interesting, some of the stuff you've there, like the shakes, because if everybody knows, if you've tabbed any distance for a long Bergen, or you've done some hard physical exercise, it actually can act as an appetite suppressant. Same as the way if you're in an extreme environment like the Arctic or the jungle or the desert, extreme heat can suppress your appetite and you don't really feel like eating.
No.
So I can imagine some of this stuff will encourage. So a lot of time I've been in these environments, you've had to force yourself to eat to get the calories down.
Yeah, and one of the reasons for that is you don't tend to hydrate as well. So a lot of people on endurance events, if you get them to drink first and sort the hydration problem, the appetite comes back. But interestingly, appetite suppression is a design element when you in ration systems, because if you can get enough nutrition in but take away the hunger, hunger's a powerful force mentally, and if you can suppress that whilst making sure people still eat sufficiently, that it's a useful trick.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So just one more question on this. For enduring operations, how long did you have these sort of rations with no fresh, no cookouts? Is there a limit to how much before it has a detrimental effect because you just piled in?
Well, okay, the longest we've had someone on one of our systems is 118 days. Guy Dave Bell rode the Atlantic the wrong way from New York to Falmouth, as you do.
Yeah.
And Dave, otherwise known as Dinger, was on a combination of rat packs and some other bits that we put in the mix. No negative detrimental effects. I think we're now at the point where we know what the body needs in terms of fiber.
Yeah.
And, if you can go for whatever it is, almost half a year, quarter of a year, third of a year, on a system that's fundamentally not fresh, and have no negative effects in terms. Yeah, no problems in terms of gut. Yeah, he didn't have any. Didn't ever feel sick. There was a reasonable amount of variety in it. Yeah, you can spin these things out to have a rotating menu of 10, 14 days. So the edge of thinking at the moment now is looking to space. And if you look at some of the work that's still very much in the research space, they're looking at 300-400 days.
Yeah.
So, there's some interesting work going on at the moment that's simulating space travel, interplanetary space travel. And there's a project going on now that's looking, I think they're doing a 284-day trial. Yeah, it's possible to, we can go a long way.
Because I just know eating compo for long term, there's always an impact on that. Well, as usual, we'll finish off with Desert Island Dits, which is the guest choice of book, film, and luxury item. So, Ali, what have you picked for this episode?
As a reservist, am I allowed 2 choices?
No, we're going to be strict, Ali. You've got to pick one.
Okie dokie.
You're going to light your rations. We're travelling light to this desert island.
Right, so I'm going to stick with my military choices then. My book of choice is Team of Teams by Stan McChrystal. So Stanley McChrystal, General Stanley McChrystal, commanded Joint Special Operations Task Force in Iraq in 2003. And he quickly realised that conventional military tactics were failing. The hierarchical, engineered, rigid Allied military just couldn't compete with this organic, dynamic enemy that was Al-Qaeda. Subsequent to that, he wrote the book. Really, he wrote the book after he left, and he wrote it with a couple of his colleagues from that organisation. But what it turned out to be was something that reflected what was going on in business at the time. And I think what was interesting was what he recognised was that the military needed to become more agile, needs to become more adaptable, and needs to become more resilient. And it was almost, the way I interpreted it was almost like taking the military has been and still is to a large extent engineered. Yeah, it's blocks, and you push the blocks together. And if you try and put a block with a circle, it doesn't work. And that's where you get friction. And what he recognised was that the enemy was this organic thing that could morph. It was like an octopus. It could respond really quickly.
I remember reading this book, and there's a bit in it. He talks about interconnected and connected organisations and the difference between the two. And it's absolutely fascinating how, I think if I recall rightly, the Army's a connected organisation, but the AQ was interconnected. It was far more flexible and was able to adapt far quicker than the Army that were chasing it.
Yeah, and the thing I recognised the most was this notion of shared consciousness. Yeah, I think I can't remember the phrase he used, but it was something about the freedom of information. By allowing information to flow and to give trust to subordinates was stuff that changed the game. If you inform well-trained, capable individuals and teams and let them get on with it, they'll do a really good job. And I think what's interesting is it kind of reflects where big tech has been. And it's nice to see some of that stuff coming through now, ironically, almost 20 years later.
Yeah, I remember going back to Silicon Valley. I'll just say this quickly because we want to move on to your film choice. But I remember saying, all this stuff we've got from working from home now. But if you go to Google's headquarters over in the States, they design their offices and that it's all open plan. But they also design it so there's flows through the building where people can meet, and there's whiteboards on the walls and electronic devices so they can share ideas. And it's that sort of connectivity that you're talking about there, Ali. So sorry, I stole your glory there, but I'll move on now because we need to get towards the end. So what's your film choice?
Got to go for the Bourne Identity. Any movie that involves a soldier saved from death by science and then turned by a secret project into a super soldier, it's right up. It's right up our street.
Fits into our conversation quite well there, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. There's that brilliant scene where he turns up at the mountain hut and he doesn't have his chems. He doesn't know what's in his chems. Yeah, it's kind of like not that we want people to be dependent, but I just that whole story is quite cool.
What's your luxury item?
It's got to be a hen.
Sustainable.
Well, I mean, yeah, they are the ultimate dinosaur. They've been around for millennia. They'll live on scraps. They keep producing eggs. And if they do croak it, you end up with a decent chicken.
That's a good choice. I like that choice. It could be vicious buggers as well. Kev, what's your choice?
Well, I'm gonna have a luxury item as well this week. The luxury item, because we've been talking about rations, was I always used to carry some garlic, salt, and paprika.
Or even paprika, not paprika.
Yeah, paprika. But choice this week and books wise, and it's quite good because it's going back to the Cold War a little bit as well. It's a true story called Tunnel 29. It's written by Helena Merriman. And the good thing about this, it's also a podcast now on the BBC, so you can actually listen to it as well. It's set around the 60s, the early 60s, on Western Berlin, where the students dug a tunnel into Eastern Berlin to get their friends and family members to escape from the tyranny of the Stasi and the Russian, the USSR. And it's a remarkable Cold War story. It's the boys' own stuff. The tunnel, they had to build other tunnels. Tunnels got flooded. They got captured, or some of them got captured. Some got interrogated. They also had a spy on the western side who was feeding to the Stasi what was going on. And alongside of all this, they got NBC News Channel, American News Channel, to fund it, and they filmed it. So if you go on YouTube and type in Tunnel 29, there's a 90-minute black and white documentary about this happening. So they filmed it in real life, but only with certain members of the tunnel gang, because they couldn't trust everyone. But NBC funded it. Apparently, Kennedy's administration tried to block this documentary before it got released because it was at the height of the Cold War, and some of the tensions and what they didn't want to show was what was going on. And I suspect that's because there was many other tunnels going from east to west.
They were actually down in the tunnel filming it at the time.
Yeah, if you go on YouTube...
Probably huge cameras and everything.
Well, I don't think it was huge. Even they had small ones in the 60s. But probably not as small as today. It wasn't on your camera phone. But if you go on YouTube, you can watch the documentary as well. It's the fact that NBC funded it because they had no digging kit. They had no generators, no lighting. So they had to find funding. These were just students. And so NBC paid for it.
Over Christmas, I watched 14 Peaks with Nimsdai Perja. Really remarkable film, what this guy did. And then I've been listening to his book when I'm out running on Beyond Possible. It's called Beyond Possible. And for those that don't know, can't be very many, Nims Perja summited 14 of the world's 8,000-metre peaks in 6 months. It resonates with me because about 10 years ago, me and Kev and a few others went trekking to Everest Base Camp. And when I landed at Lukla Airport till I got back to Kathmandu, I was hanging out my arse. I had altitude sickness. I could hardly eat. And I had to sit and watch Kev every morning, tucking into a big breakfast and drinking beer at night. So I just couldn't do it. The book itself gives a lot more detail on Nims and about his poor upbringing, how his family, his other brothers were Gurkhas. He sent him to boarding school. But he's a man of outstanding determination. He's determined to do well at school when he was out running for the school. He failed his first attempt at Gurkha selection, so he went back again. He got into the UK Special Forces. He was the first Gurkha to serve in the Special Boat Service. Absolutely huge determination. And he did this feat after only 7 years climbing. And he'd been an interesting subject for a medical examination. I know he's a Nepali, but he must have an exceptional mountain physiology. And going back to what you're saying earlier on, Ali, when he's climbing the mountains, he eats very little. He says in this book, he takes water, and that's about it. He doesn't really have anything else. But from what I understand, you've spoken to him a couple of times.
Yeah, so one of our athletes, Adri Brownlee, is part of Nims's team, and we know Nims. What's interesting, he grew up in he didn't grow up in the hills in Nepal, so he's from the lower parts of.
Yeah, I think he grew up in the mountains, but then he moved down to sort of the lower place where the jungle is.
And but you touched on it. He has got a phenomenal physiology. And they've done some tests. He's done some work at the London Altitude Centre. Yeah, his oxygen uptake is phenomenal. So you look at performance there's a great podcast called Human Performance Outliers, I think it is. And yeah, he's one of those examples. Physiologically, he is different. Yeah, as you can see. I mean, you look at some of the videos. There's a great video of him and 7 Nepali Sherpas summiting K2. They were the first all Sherpa team to summit K2, and they're the first team to summit in winter. And K2 is known as the Savage Mountain. There were quite a few fatalities. This season wasn't the worst, but yeah, the thing that goes hand in hand with mountaineering is fatalities.
Yeah, K2 kills 40% of people that attempt to climb it. It was on that in his book. All right, Ali, thanks for that. So what's the best way for people to get in touch, Ali, whether it's via social media or your website?
Yeah, always keen to have a chat. If there's anyone out there doing something interesting and just wants to chat about nutrition, you can get us at Resilient Nuts on social or resilientnutrition.com. And if there's anyone out there planning to do a course, feel free to get in touch and we'll give you a hand.
Well, that's it for another episode. So thank you, Ali, for coming on the podcast, and to you, the listener, for your continued support and suggestions. Please keep them coming, and our email and social media links are at the bottom of the show notes. And as always, I don't mind a letter, postcard, anything with a stamp on. You can
I'll put Ali's links in at the bottom as well, but no postcode, mate, because he's moved on. He's a 21st century too.
You can find us on all the usual suspects, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, post boxes. And if you enjoyed the podcast, it'd be great for you if you could leave us a review on the platform you download it from, especially on Spotify or iTunes, as most of our downloads come from there. And thank you again to Nick Beale for his continuing support and sponsorship to the series and offering technical support through his company, ISAR. See you again next time on The Unconventional Soldier.